Hi, good evening, viewers. Happy Independence Day. Jai Hind. On the occasion of Independence Day, we've decided to today bring on board a very prominent academician to fit the occasion. So he is Dr. Kaustubh Deka, Assistant Professor of Dibrugarh University, and he teaches in the Department of Political Science. He is, apart from being a professor, he's also a columnist and a commentator. He's very prominent. You'll see him in many social media and many TV channels too. So let us all welcome him. Hi, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you.
Good
Glad to be
evening.
here. Good evening.
Right. Happy Independence Day, sir.
Same to you, and I wish all the viewers also a very happy Independence Day, 75th Independence Day.
Right. So, as our custom goes in Northeast Today live session, we always begin with our intro videos of our guests. So,
All right,
we would like to go ahead with that first. Right.
sure.
Dr. Kaustubh Deka is an assistant professor at Dibrugarh University, Assam. He teaches in the Department of Political Science. Previously, Dr. Kaustubh Deka was with the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia Milia, Islamia, New Delhi. He has been a fellow at the Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy, Chennai, where he looked into the issue of youth and political participation in the context of India's Northeast. He graduated in political science from Delhi University and holds a doctorate from the School of Social Science, JNU, New Delhi, master's degree in political science and M.Phil from JNU, New Delhi. His academic interest includes, besides others, issues of ecological politics in Northeast India, trends of youth politics and identity assertion in the region, as well as inquiries into understanding the category of Northeast India. His professional experience includes assistant professor at the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research at Jamia Milia Islamia, New Delhi from June to September 2017, as assistant professor at Indraprastha College for Women in Delhi University from September 2014 to August 2016, public policy scholar at Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy, Chennai from October 2013 to April 2014. Program Manager of Research at Center for Legislative Research and Advocacy, New Delhi from March 2010 to May 2011. Research Coordinator at Center for Studying of Developing Societies, CSTS, New Delhi from October 2010 to March 2011. Research Associate under Professor Dipankar Gupta at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi from September 2008 to April 2009. Research Associate to Dr. Kavita Sivaramakrishnan, Harvard Center for Population and Development Studies from July to September 2009. Research Associate under Professor Praveen Jha at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi from January to July 2007. He specializes in social movement studies, identity politics, and youth studies. His research project was titled Youth Activism and Democratic Politics in India's Northeast 2014 Election in Perspective. His research publications include Prohibitionist Protest by Women in Northeast India, Antyachar, From Movements to Accords and Beyond, The Artist and the Society, Students as Agents of Identity Formation, Language and Literature as Fountainhead of Identities, The Writing of Politics and Politics of Writing, Interrogating the Developmental Policies in the Northeast India, Journal of Center for Economic Studies and Planning. These are some of his publications, with more on the way, and we at Northeast Today wish him the very best in his upcoming ventures.
Who would like to come in? Abhijit. You saw that. Dr. Kaustubh Deka. Abhijit, who would like to come in? Kaustubh Deka from Dibrugarh. Abhijit, you're coming in. This link, who's making this a Hindu-Muslim issue? Abhijit. Abhijit. Abhijit is on the debate.
We have some double standards.
Kaustubh Deka from Dibrugarh versus Rupam Banerjee from Kolkata. Please, calm down everyone.
Yeah, Arnab, you see, that's the irony, because as you rightly say, Assam has been fighting a rather heroic battle all alone all these years. And now because of Bengal election, now suddenly people are kind of talking about it. And you know very well that a lot of young people in Assam have lost life. It has been a ravaging issue in Assam, and we all have been facing this is a real issue, the illegal infiltration issue. And also, I completely agree with you that it is actually an issue of citizenship, a citizen versus a foreigner, not a Hindu versus Muslim issue.
And I'm actually trying to bring in this one region, one area which often fails to find enough mention and focus, that is northeast part of this country. And I'll be, my paper that is there in the journal, and I'll be mostly drawing from there, is focusing on some of the experiences and what kind of complexities and contradiction it throws up within the whole discourse of women's movement, as well as the struggle for prohibition, the the whole demand for prohibition. I'll be talking mostly of experiences from Nagaland and Manipur.
और of course CAA का जितना expectation था कि CAA will be a decisive factor, लेकिन शायद CAA electorally इतना translate होगा नहीं as a factor, limited impact उसका होगा. It is more like a symbolic statement. लेकिन इलेक्ट्रली उसका वर्डिक्ट के ऊपर कितना असर होगा, दैट्स ए मैटर ऑफ डिबेट. मतलब ये यूथ वोट क्योंकि वो भी फ्रेगमेंटेड हो जाएगा इवेंचुअली, अलग अलग रीजन वाइज और कम्युनिटी वाइज उसका फ्रेगमेंटेशन भी आएगा. और काफ़ी ये भी है कि यूथ में जो वोटिंग एपैथी होता है, वोटिंग एपैथी भी बहुत है. इफ यू सी द परसेंटेज ऑफ पोलिंग, यूथ पोलिंग हमेशा थोड़ा कम ही होता है एक्चुअली.
To give you a brief introduction of Dr. Kaustubh Deka, he teaches at the Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University, Assam. Formerly, he was with the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia, Milia, Islamia, New Delhi. He has been a fellow at the Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy, Chennai, where he looked into the issue of youth and political participation in the context of India's Northeast. He holds a doctorate degree from the School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His academic interest includes, besides others, issues of ecological politics in Northeast India, trends of youth politics and identity, assertions in the region, as well as inquiries into understanding the category of Northeast India.
Wow, sir. Welcome again. We are so honored to have you.
That's very
So,
generous and very detailed of you.
that,
That was a
so
very
we are
important-
honored. I mean, we were wondering if you would give us your time on this day or not. And then when you agreed, we were so
My absolute
delighted,
pleasure.
sir.
Totally, my pleasure.
Right, sir. So you've
Yeah.
studied Northeast
Yeah.
politics, and you've studied it in very detail. So now, on the 75th year of independence, where do you see Northeast?
This question itself is actually a question for many talks, seminar, conferences. Right? It's a very broad question. So let me try to look at it this way. Before we talk about where is Northeast in the larger scheme of things today, I would just try to emphasize on what do we understand by Northeast. I mean, that we are so used to using this category of Northeast in our everyday conversation. So first of all, let me try to kind of, deconstruct this whole category of Northeast briefly, of course. And I mean, I would like to emphasize that Northeast is actually some kind of a concept. It is a strategy, as well as it's a lived reality. And all these three kind of ways of looking at Northeast is very important. It's interconnected and it's very significant. It's a lived reality for, of course, a lot of us. It is conceptualized as an entity for policy and different kind of issues. And it's also a strategy that is employed by civil society as well as different groups, including parties and local groups involved. So this kind of very unique and complex positioning of Northeast India is something that we have to always keep in mind before we use it in a very kind of, casual, you can say, or taken for granted manner, which has become, of course, it's become mainstreamed. It has become, in a way, categorized, or you can say stereotyped, but we have to always keep in mind this kind of nuances, you can say, or this kind of this complexities that are there when we use the category called Northeast, because this is connected to the question you're asking. So this is very central to the questions that we are dealing with today. How do we see Northeast today? Where do we see Northeast today? And how do we see in the days to come? So first of all, one has to understand and clarify that there are so many realities within Northeast. So moment we talk about Northeast, of course, we end up kind of essentializing something. We end up kind of, generalizing a bit, which is kind of maybe inevitable. With any category, like it's always inevitable. We always end up in a way, leaving aside some kind of, uniqueness or some kind of differences within that. So having said that, having given that, this is a clarification, or this is something I wanted to say at the outset, because I can kind of guess that perhaps today's discussion will be mostly on Northeast. So this was something I wanted to kind of, set it out at the very beginning, because this is something very crucial and something very understandable, something that has to be kind of, explained. So having said that, Northeast, of course, has come a long way. In fact, this morning itself, I was reading one very old. We have one very old Assamese, classic. It's like a fiction. It's a novel. It's Gyanpith awardee novel called Mrityunjay. It's about actually by late writer Birendra Kumar Bhattacharya, a very famous Assamese writer, icon of Assamese literature, you can say. So he has his novel called Mrityunjay. It's actually on the life of freedom fighters, right? Some people who are who took part in freedom struggle, and their aspirations and how they looked at the years to come in India. And it ends with a very, you can say, poignant kind of a sentence. The main protagonist, he says that I hope like this is the freedom for which I gave up my life. I'm just paraphrasing, it's not exactly same. So it ends with this poignant note that those people from Northeast who came from pretty remote places, you can understand I'm talking about 1930s and 40s. Back then, of course, Northeast was much more, in a way, you can say, remote and disconnected. But even then, Northeast was a very central participant. At least, again, when I say Northeast, I'm again essentializing. That's what I meant. I mean, let's say Assam, mostly Assam, and some parts of other places, other states also. That time, most states were part of Assam. Most present 2-3 states were part of Assam. But by and large, you see that from even remotest of places, people did take part in the anti-colonial struggle. Of course, some people called it freedom struggle against the British as part of Indian National Congress, but others from their own perspective, own vantage point, it was an anti-colonial struggle by and large. So Northeast had always been a participant. And this final observation in the book I was mentioning in Mrityunjay, that protagonist was wondering whether my struggle was worth it, whether I gave up my life. I hope this is the right kind of freedom for which I gave up my life. That is something, that's the question that haunted many generations of Northeast people from different societies, because soon after independence, we saw there are different struggles emerging in different places regarding land reform, regarding identity, regarding resources, regarding language, all kind of different type of struggles and movements came up. So Northeast, of course, went through some kind of a very vibrant and in the same way, a very, you can say, tumultuous kind of, difficult years, difficult decades. So Northeast has come a long way since then. And as some commentators have very aptly put it, Northeast has in fact lived 1,000 years in a lifetime. So if you ask the experience of our grandfathers and grandmothers, that generation, the kind of life and kind of places they have seen, we even cannot relate to that, their stories, right? I mean, which is of course by and large true from many regions of India, many parts of India, but I'm pretty sure that scale of difference is much vast and much kind of, gigantic in case of Northeast, especially the remote areas, kind of changes that people have seen. So that way, 75 years on, of course, Northeast has become a very different place. A lot of positive things have happened, of course, in terms of connectivity, in terms of, so quote unquote development. But of course, there are many gaps still to be filled. One have to mention it. There are many kind of apprehensions that we have. There are many kind of, void that needs to be filled. And in some senses, the struggle and the challenges continues. Maybe we'll talk about this more in the course of today's dialogue, today's conversation.
Definitely, sir. So what I understand is there are a lot of problems facing Northeast at the moment, but then you're positive that it's heading towards betterment and progress.
You
That's
can
your
say so.
right.
As in, to be positive is more
Because
like it's in Northeast. I think we are habitually positive. So I think we always try to look for the silver lining. But it does not
right,
mean that when you talk about something being positive, you do not denounce the critical parts. You do not recognize that there is a problem. Positivity comes only after you recognize the problems. So I think
right.
it has been a continuous journey for sure. It has been a journey, and there are changes. I will not say that it is a very smooth upward kind of a upward mobility, but there are definite shift that Northeast is going through. That's how I will put it.
Definitely. But in your personal opinion, what are the current issues plaguing Northeast society, especially when it comes to its development?
Well, again, this answer will depend on which state we are talking about, because, as you are well aware, we have very diverse kind of not only demographics, diverse topography, diverse climatic zones, ecological zones, diverse societies within Northeast. So the demands and the requirements will vary as per the region and the states within Northeast. But even then, if I give a broad kind of analysis, broad picture, of course, I will say one very prominent major intervention needed urgently is the issue of employment, of course, because I am in touch with, I mean, I am in the teaching profession, so that requires me to be in touch with young people mostly. So if I, and also my research interest also lies with youth mobilization and youth identity, youth politics. So if I see one of the primary kind of intervention that is needed in Northeast, not only now, but it's increasingly becoming more and more urgent, is the creation of jobs. It's employment, and by job I don't mean say government jobs. It can be in many sectors. It needs to be multi-sectoral kind of intervention, but we need
Yes,
to think about jobs and skills. So that is one very major kind of intervention needed right now. But again, here I would like to distinguish between two things. Sometimes we tend to kind of conflict kind of symptoms with factors. So here again, maybe this issue of joblessness, or you can say lack of employment avenues, might not be the problems itself, but might be a symptom of something else. And what will be the symptom? That is a larger debate. Now, sorry, what are the factors? That's the larger debate. What is contributing to this, joblessness, or people failing to find adequate kind of employment opportunities? That's a debate that has been going on for long. And on that, if I again summarize, because these are very long discussions, and today I understand that we want to touch on many different topics. So I'm just trying to kind of summarize the key points. Is that no,
right.
number one, of course, is that the whole idea about the place of Northeast as such as a resource-rich region, which has been rich in terms of minerals of different kinds, forest resources of different kinds, which has been a colonial enterprise. I mean, the very integration of Northeast into the Indian Union has to be understood with the colonial backdrop, right? I mean, that's why I emphasize again and again on this complexity when we talk about Northeast, because that history is different for different region. The cultural history or the sociological history is different for different region. We have different dates or different years in which place began to be identified with Northeast, or so-called Northeast of the British time or the colonial time. So therefore, the history of our resources, sometimes it's very interesting to map our own history. So our social history we can map through the history of resource extraction, the setting up of industries of different kind, setting up of mines and different kind of refineries of different types, the forest industry of different kinds. So that whole idea of a resource periphery, the Northeast became a resource periphery where it was at the margin of the British India. It became some kind of it's like a colony within a colony kind of a situation. So that type of that history is very crucial for us to understand that how in many ways it might not perpetuate in a very similar way, but it has led to certain kind of syndrome, and those syndromes perhaps persist in different ways, and that is creating certain dependency at one level at the center, that there is this whole way in which center is funding different kind of initiatives at one without creating enough kind of local employments at one level. I'm not saying that that is the full picture, but I'm saying that syndrome or that characteristic persists, that particular nature of development that that external intervention without creating enough local avenues that perhaps existed for so many decades, that we had fewer opportunities to develop local skills to create local kind of job generation. And second, it led to a lot of resentment. This whole idea about being resource periphery led to a lot of resentment. There are a lot of grievances in the region that the resources of the region has not been used in a way that develops the region in a.
I think there's a bit of a network problem on Sir's end. We'll wait for him to get back. Uh, Meanwhile, I would like to request our viewers, if you have any questions and if you have, or even comments also, you can send in and we'll take them as and when we can. It was a really, really interesting conversation and I had many follow-up questions to ask him. And I see there's being in Northeast, I mean, the network connection is always an issue. But never mind, we'll wait for him.
Yeah, am I back?
Oh, I can see him.
Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I don't know. I think I was saying something very critical or something. I think the system was not happy and I got logged out. I don't know. I don't know. Just joking.
We will make sure that they bring you on board and we'll not let go today, sir.
Yeah. So in the spirit of Independence Day, we should persist, right? So
yes.
So bringing this story to a positive direction now is that, of course, I mean, what has happened is that, of course, from Northeast also we have strong voices that emerged over the decades who took participation in politics at the national level as well as at the regional level. So this whole history of federalism in India, like the demands of state, how the states asserted their rights and successfully kind of achieved their demands. In that also Northeast had played a big role. In the history of regionalism in India, Northeastern states have played a big role, right, to put their agendas in the national level. So in that also some of the factors that we are talking about, we are discussing about the problems of Northeast. I'm saying these grievances are also very important to understand. So at one level, as I told you, number one, the creation of jobs. Second is that there are certain demands from the Northeastern states about special recognition, about constitutional protection, about given some special status, which has already been given, of course, as per sixth schedule and as per different provisions of fifth schedule also, special articles from 370 onwards that is given. So those are, of course, there, and there are more demands. So these are some important areas that one has to look at. So constitutional kind of creativity, constitutional arrangements have to be looked at, as well as arrangements at the level of job creation and economic intervention. Both are, I think, important, very important right now.
Right, sir. So I agree with you. And if we are making our voices heard and we are placing our problems in the center, and I would say that there's a lot more support and they are listening now ever than before. I mean, there's always been a problem of isolation, but then still there are so many basic things like you must have read about the Twitter storm on like Northeast Matters and issue of inclusion of Northeast history in the uh, CBSE and ICSE syllabus. So, what is your take on that, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned this recent kind of trends and recent developments. Not very recent; it's been quite some years now. I think, see, this again relates back to my previous point that these are all part of the grievance that I was talking about. As more and more young people from Northeast are coming out now, there are quite a solid participation across board. You go to any industry, you go to any field, you will find people from Northeast. Maybe numbers are still not big, but there is definite presence. So now the realization is becoming more and more about the lack of representation, this ignorance that remains at large, right? The ignorance about Northeast India and rest of India, that is becoming a critical point. That is something not acceptable to this new generation. Therefore, I think it's very good that these points, the demands are being raised. And of course, this Twitter storm and this pushing of these demands in social media is the latest kind of I can say, a form of this. But of late, for some years, you've seen massive mobilization in especially the metros of India, or by the migrants of Northeast India who are living, or expats of Northeast India who are living in these metros. Especially, it had to do with this incidents of racist violence that sometimes led to very sad development, also like death of students, death of young people. So this it started all from there. That's demand for recognition. And interestingly, and I have pointed this out often in some of my writings also, that there is a very subtle but very, very interesting shift that you see from the decades of 70s and 80s, where young people took to street, from the shift that we are not Indian. Right? They had posters back then that we are Khasi, not Indian. The famous KSU poster, Khasi by blood, Indian by accident. From there, you see there is a shift where people are holding placards saying Indians and equal. We are Indians and equal. So there is a very interesting and very big kind of shift from that position, that now, therefore, the political position and you see the movement position is different. Earlier, there was this lot of focus on differences, the cultural politics. Now, it's more constitutional. It is cultural, but through the through the constitutional schemes, that you have to recognize our differences and give us equal treatment, give us equal rights. It is a politics of difference, but politics of difference that asks for equality, not a politics of difference that asks for separation. Right? So that's a very big distinction. I'm not saying that there are no groups anymore that talks about this complete difference or complete separation. That reality is also there. But I'm saying by and large, the mainstreaming of that, the mainstreaming is happening towards this differences is come equality, differences with equality, existence of that. So that is a very powerful message. And that is a message, I think, especially on a day like today, on Independence Day, I think we should focus on those type of messages, which is about equality that can exist with differences.
So when we are fighting unitedly, I mean, for like you said, differences with equality at the same time,
Yeah.
the recent problem of border issue with that just occurred between Assam and the other northeast states, there seems to be a bit of a trust deficit with Assam. What is your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, first of all, it is very, very unfortunate. We were all very, very disheartened and very saddened by the very unfortunate incident that happened. And it's not the only incident. In fact, this type of, border dispute, interstate border dispute has been a reality for Northeast for quite some time. And first of all, we have to go back and understand why it happens. We cannot understand it without understanding this whole mess that colonialism created in these parts. This arbitrary kind of borders that dates back to the colonial times. Therefore, again, the aspect of resource that I was mentioning, the resource history is very important, the extraction of resources, that which mandated this creation of these borders. These are all, in fact, mandated by the logic of colonial resource extraction, right? I mean, this colonial revenue generation, where they saw that the forest is needed here, a tea garden is needed there. So therefore, they created this kind of boundaries. So those boundaries completely left out participation of local people, and still does. So that is one of the root cause of these problems. And when we try to solidify those colonial boundaries, of course, that ends up creating a lot of problems. So therefore, my only focus or only plea to everyone concerned.
Sir, I'm unable to hear you.
I'm there, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
It was about to go, but somehow, yeah. So, I mean, the stakeholders that ways needs to be involved in any solution. It cannot be just a solution between two, high-level committee of state government or some third-party government, central government. Local people, end of the day, people who are living there, for whom it is a lived reality, they need to be consulted, they need to be taken on board. That is number one. And number two is that Northeast is a very complex place, as we all know. There's so many nationalities, there are different demographic realities, there are different social realities. So one has to be very sensitive to that. And the protection to the indigenous communities are very, very crucial. Because, end of the day, one has to establish one's connection with the land and one's identity is rooted with land. So that needs to be completely protected. And there are a lot of pressure. And we talk about this pressure on land. Sometimes we immediately think about immigration or, quote unquote, the issue of illegal migration. But here I'm not only talking about that. I'm talking about different type of capital, influx of capital, international capital, this footloose capitalism that we call, that different companies, corporations coming, and a lot of land takeover happening. If you see the data of land disposition, Northeast land disposition is one of the highest in the country. So this land takeover is a very big issue. So these issues, and especially borderlands, like this area, the disputed area recently, that Assam, Mizoram, and other borderlands are usually the areas where this type of takeovers are happening a lot. It's very interesting. If you see the pattern, the kind of industries being set up, plantations coming in. So these are the areas where this whole complex kind of a reality is unfolding. So all this have to be factored in. So it's not a very easy solution. Of course, governments have to be sensitive, empathetic, and careful, cautious without going for any aggressive solution. But people needed to be trusted, as well as civil society from both sides. And finally, the indigenous people needs to be given protection. That's all I'll say.
Right. So, what are your views on development and growth situations in Northeast states?
Development and growth situation, again, it's a very big question. As in, I will break it down. So basically, if you see indicators, like nowadays India is focusing a lot on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we are talking about SDGs as one of the yardstick of measuring development. We have seen that there are some concerted efforts to break it down to state level sectoral SDGs. That you are trying to frame it as per the realities and the needs of different states. So that is a good thing, that we have to have a state-wise focus within Northeast. Different states have to identify their priorities and then kind of approach it that way. So if you see it state-wise, I see that one thing that is happening a lot in Northeast is the development in terms of infrastructure. We are almost equating development to infrastructure. And as we see that there are these smart cities announcements, the Northeast had up to 7 to 8 smart cities. And there are, if you see the data from National Highway Authority, and Northeast had some of the highest allocation of national highway making. So in terms of infrastructure, there are a lot going on. And in fact, one very receptive social commentator, he calls it some kind of the reign of cementing. So there is a concretization of Northeast, that massive concretization. So concrete is overtaking Northeast. So that gives us that brings us to a very critical point. That is, we have to think of Northeast also as an ecological plot. It's also ecological zone. It is one of the most sensitive biodiversity hotspot of whole of not only India but whole of Southeast Asia. So we have to understand that reality of Northeast. We also have to understand Northeast as a very critical hotspot in terms of ethnology also, in terms of our cultural diversity also. We have groups which are very delicate, they are very sensitive, they are linguistically endangered, they are culturally endangered. Also, third point is that we have to think of Northeast as a geopolitical hotspot. So there are so many sensitive kind of aspects to Northeast that this type of infrastructural development has to be applied through a lot of these filterings. So one is not sure how much the government is understanding or appreciating these sensitivities, because sometimes within that tree, if the balance is not maintained, so it is basically you can say some triadic or triangular kind of concept, in which you have national security at one point, cultural point at one point, and so-called development and growth at one point. So this cultural sensitivity, security, and development, if these three do not maintain the internal balance, I think these smaller societies of Northeast will end up suffering, and which is a global phenomenon. When we talk about Northeast, I keep emphasizing that we have to also draw some global kind of parallel. We have to look at some other regions in the world which is going through this flux. And we did not go very far. There are very interesting work nearer to our country also, in places like Indonesia, places like Vietnam and others, small states with smaller societies. There are these studies that shows that this huge kind of transition with a lot of capital coming, and how the transition affects the local communities. and how in a short span they of course achieve some development, quote unquote developmental indicators, but at some other kind of cost, at the cost of environment and the cost of their cultural changes. So therefore I would really urge everyone to be mindful of this type of changes and the need to maintain the balance all the time.
That is, you've pretty much answered my questions too, sir, because there's always been there's been demand for development. The government has been wanting to, but at the same time, there are issues of protection of the indigenous tribes, and also
Yeah,
it being a border. Many of them have share border with international countries, so that
yeah,
can be another issue. So
yeah,
in and then there's been sometimes. What is your take, sir? Because sometimes it just happens like the government wants to bring in so many development and going back to the dam issue. I mean, there's been so much of protest, and then
yeah,
the fight against larger dams versus smaller dams, and
yeah,
the people have they have not been consulted, and most of the time. So, what is your take on it, sir? Do you think the government is actually doing an in-depth study before trying to implement these large projects and going ahead? Because
yeah,
most of the time, it just feels like they are not.
yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for the question. It's a very important question. And this issue of dam actually it's a reflection of the larger and ecological debate that we are having in Northeast, which is, I mean, the issue of the importance of local voices or the importance of, the local perceptions and how sometimes there are provisions within law and yet it has been bypassed time and again, and how there are also provisions, there are also positive, you can say, or empowering enactments, empowering laws also that has been passed, which the groups, organizations, even people concerned have actively used also in their favor. So it goes both ways. How there are positive examples of how proactive or positive environmental laws have been used by local population, and at the same time how the existing laws have been manipulated and bypassed by different agencies and different parties concerned. Uh, so we can talk about, say, the proposal in recent times in Arunachal, this massive kind of dam in Dibang Valley. Right now, sorry, I'm forgetting the exact name. You might remember. It's in the Upper Dibang Valley. There was this proposal of constructing Italin. I remember now, Italin dam.
Yeah.
So Italin was a proposal. It would have been, if it was done, it would have been not only the largest in India, but perhaps in South Asia, it would have been one of the largest kind of high altitude kind of catchment area then. So when the proposal came, it was very shocking for a lot of people because it was completely ignoring a lot of kind of protocols and a lot of kind of environmental kind of understanding. And that was possible also because if you remember that time there was a proposal and it was very controversial, though it was shelved for a time being, but it was not cancelled. It is only shelved. It is under consideration now. That is the environmental impact assessment draft of 2020. So it was proposing to bypass a lot of the safeguards. Like one very crucial clause in that was, in fact, not one, there are two, three, but one I want to mention is that if an area is within 100 kilometer of aerial distance from international border, then that within that area, any kind of industrial development would not need any environmental impact clearance. So they can bypass the clearance of consultation with local stakeholders or any kind of other certifications from respective bodies. So it would have been very disastrous for, especially for Northeast, because especially states like Arunachal, as we know, that most of these areas will fall within 100 kilometer of aerial distance, and that will be very, very, in a way, dangerous and harmful for kind of low-lying areas, downstream areas, especially the place right now I am in Dibrugarh. So these are potentially affected by this type of schemes. So that is one. And number two, we have seen there are a lot of studies, a lot of case studies, a lot of documentation there, where we see that even then, if there is even when there is a local consultation and so-called hearing, assessment hearing, many a times how local people, actual people, affected people, they are sometimes sidelined or they are left out of it. Sometimes these are held in very far away places to which local people just cannot come or the information reaches late. So there are a lot of manipulations done. But having said all that, I want to emphasize here on another very important point. That is, and which is the reality of our places, which is why we call it resource periphery. That is that end of the day, many a time these industries, this kind of developmental activities, they end up being the only source of employment, only source of employment generation also. So therefore, you see that sometime there also is some kind of a local support also for these programs, for these activities. Because what happens is that local people end of the day end up also looking towards some employment, some revenue, some source of income. So these developments, regardless of their disastrous effect, they become the sole dependence also for the people. So it's like a very complex situation, and that's why that is the sad reality of a resource periphery, where you end up kind of depending on the very resources, very resource generation. You become participant of the resource generation. You become participant of a process that is somehow maybe killing of your future in some senses.
Yeah, in
And
the
that is
long
a
run,
reality
it may not.
in the long run.
Right.
So that is the comparison I was drawing with a lot of study in Indonesia, especially the forests of Indonesia, their studies. And they say that how it is difficult to understand who is opposing, who is participating. It's a very complex mix. And that is why we have to understand this complexity of these places.
Coming to the dams, I mean, I'm thinking about what is your opinion on those domes? Does Northeast require in near future, especially Arunachal, with the tension that it often faces with China?
Sorry, first part of your question, what did you?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you repeat?
The drone, like with the drone domes, the ones that, do you think we need it, because there's often conflict between China and Arunachal in border states like Arunachal and China. So do we need something like this counter unmanned air systems to monitor those,
All right.
to detect those hostile drones in borders? Because that's
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a question. That's the answer. Maybe, I mean, I'm not an expert on. I'm not a security expert. This is a very technical question. But all I would say is that, I mean, which I often face because we write sometime on activist policy or this kind of cooperation. What I would say is that we just cannot ignore China. China is like the white elephant. It's like the elephant in the room that no one talks about, right? So when we talk about activist policy, this type of issues about realities of Northeast, especially of this Arunachal belt, China is a reality that we have to reckon with. And in ideal situation, of course, one would have gained if there are ways to find out ways to collaborate for a larger ecological future of Northeast India, if for nothing else. Because we know that we share an ecological zone with China. A lot of our rivers come out from there. So, I mean, we need some kind of river basin cooperation. So that is something that in the long run we cannot ignore. So I think rather than having a very hawkish security-centric approach, I think one have to find more and more avenue how we emphasize on commonalities, how it is a common reality, it's a common future that both these superpowers, aspiring superpowers have, and they have to, and this will only work in the interest of the people. But in the interest of the people, we have to focus on the commonality, that we just cannot ignore that our realities are intertwined. And anyone would know, anyone travels in Arunachal, especially the bordering districts of Arunachal. I mean, of course, most of the districts are bordering, barring one or two. Some are bordering Myanmar and some are bordering China, Bhutan and China. So we know that, I mean, it's such a big presence, right? I mean, sometimes these realities are not understood by certain people sitting in far off places. And even personally, I have had debates on Twitter, on other places when I mention these issues. Let me give you a very quick example, like short example. When I often travel, I drive down many a times to Arunachal on work, also meeting friends. It's just a neighborhood, so it's one of my favorite places to travel around. So many a times, in our radio, forget Arunachal, even Upper Assam also, we get very clear radio signal of Radio Beijing, Radio China. It's China International, as we say.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't even get local radio channels, but we get China International. And they are giving news in Hindi because that is part of their propaganda, right? They're giving news in Hindi with clear signal. So, I mean, when I pointed out these things, there are a lot of people who really dismissed it. Even very top, I don't want to name officials now, but very high-level government officials were dismissing and denying. And I had to share recordings because I had recorded those, and I had to share them on Twitter. And it led to some big debate, and someone eventually, even it came out as a news article, someone wrote an article on that, how China is gaining upper hand on the radio war, something like that they say. I was not calling radio war, but it finally some people say it's a communication war. So this is a reality, what I'm trying to say, that that there is a powerful neighbor, so we cannot ignore them. We have to engage with them. And now, how to engage with them? Whether it is a very militaristic kind of engagement, or it is an engagement that talks of different fronts. And I'm sure, I know think tanks, I know academicians, scholars, even diplomats who are engaging on different forums, on different fronts, not only military front, but on different fronts. That is important, I think. Even civil societies, we have a lot of potential, even at the knowledge level. And I often emphasize that the universities of Northeast have this mandate that we have to reach out to Southeast Asia. Not only China, but our neighboring, like Myanmar, even the Sagaing province of Myanmar is very near. Kachin is very near. So we have to reach out to them, and we can have knowledge exchange. We can have institutional exchange with them. Even China is developing that Linji a lot. Linji is the other side of Mechuka, actually. So that is, they are developing that region a lot. So in the ideal world, one can just wish for it at this point that we had some exchanges with those places, and it would boost both sides. It will be a boost for Northeast India also, and the whole region can be developed. So we need that type of a vision where we think of the region in a broader scale, not in a very bird eye box kind of boxed vision. So we have to come out of that box.
True, sir. I agree with you. Rather than any technological developments and face off, a peaceful resolution would always be the first welcome.
By the way, I'm not ruling out the technological intervention. That will always happen.
Yes.
That is happening all the time. But I'm saying that we have to also keep in mind other implications, because the reality of the people who are living in these places, that has to be at the center stage. It's very easy to cry for war or peace, or either way, sitting far off. But people for whom it is a matter of day-to-day life, or it is a matter of their lived reality, their perception is very crucial, and they have to be involved in this process. That's all I'd say.
True, sir. I agree with you. And along with it, like you said, dismissing the reality of what it is, and the development on the other side that's taking place in the border. Dismissing is definitely not the answer. Accepting and acknowledging what is there, and then making the changes on this arena on this side would be, I think, a better way to deal with the situation.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah. So you had also mentioned about UNDP 2030 sustainable goals. So do you think Northeast states can create the landmark contribution, and do you think it is ready to be able to make that contribution, and if yes, why?
I think Northeast is poised in a good way towards that, because there are some very concerted focus, as you know that and this is something which is it's a part of a process, as we know from last couple of years, decade or so, there is a emphasis or some kind of a specialized focus on Northeast. Some special group has been created, empowered group of ministers, and Niti Aayog has a special forum for Northeast. So there are these special policy measures, and even for SDGs also. In recent years, in fact, if I'm right, it was last year, 2020, there's a special conclave of SDG that happened in Northeast in Guwahati, which looks into this framework. And as part of that, there are this state-wise and as well as sectoral kind of framework that has been devised. So I think if that focus is maintained, we have a good atmosphere for that now. Only thing is that, again, the larger issues that kind of in a way affects Northeast, that is the internal problems, our problem of kind of the ecological climate problems, there's some industrial disaster that have been happening here. That has to be, one has to be careful about that. Otherwise, I think Northeast, especially in terms of if there is a lot of focus in this of the skill development also, turning the knowledge into skill. So on that, there is a good opportunity because so far, and it relates to the very first point that we discussed today, that is about employment. Because
Yeah.
Northeast has certain skills which has not been innovatively used so far, right? For example, Northeast has a certain kind of skill for language. People of Northeast are good in language, so they can take center stage on that. The language knowledge of English can be a plus point in generating a lot of jobs. Plus,
Mm-hmm.
their traditional knowledge of the communities, indigenous communities, the traditional knowledge that they have, which
Especially
nowadays being,
medicines also.
yeah, absolutely, traditional expertise on different things. So traditional knowledge systems can be harnessed if there's a right direction, as you rightly mentioned about medicine, but any other things also, especially the traditional knowledge of handicraft and artifacts,
Handicraft.
which is recognized now more and more as in tune with this whole idea about green energy or clean energy. So to that, if it can be tuned into, so there are this huge potential. So it can be aligned with the SDGs that way. If we harness on our traditional potentials and then attune it with the SDG goals, and and it's good to see that there are already initiatives towards that.
True, sir. So, and um, so looking back at one of your, you had made a statement about in one of your in the articles, it was written that Akuni uh, is a story of racism told from the eyes of the privileged. So, so can you elaborate a little on it?
Uh, well, I mean, this again will take some time because that statement that you're quoting, it needs some kind of a context. It needs some kind of a, in a way,
We'd
placing
love
of
to
a
hear, I mean, even if it takes a little more time, sir, because I really
yeah,
wanted to
yeah.
ask
No,
this
no,
one.
I will shorten it. No, because see, I mean, well, when this movie came out, of course, all of us were very happy and thrilled. I still think it was a very good intervention, good initiative, and very powerful movie, no doubt. That it talked about issues of racism and it talked about the issue of this discrimination that is kind of facial discrimination, but it is based on one's, as bluntly put, it's based on one's shape of one's face or how one looks like. It is a look-based discrimination. That's why it's racism. It's nothing else. It is just as simple as how one looks like and discriminating somebody based on one's look. So, so we were very happy that this issue was made. But some of us were just trying to point out that perhaps there are some gaps in the narrative of the movie that uh, the movie ends up giving in a way certain signals or certain statements which might also try to say that in some way the blame also belongs to the people themselves for not making enough attempt to mingle very in subtle ways that I mean if you see, I mean, now again that's something, it takes time. I have to do some, you have to go character wise because it's actually an article that I wrote for this Riot magazine from Northeast and also later for Scroll, and that got discussed in many places. So there I do a character analysis. I show which character is placed in which way. There, I remember there's a character called Bendang. So Bendang
Yes.
was a victim of bullying. Right? People were bullying him badly, and he was traumatized. He was traumatized because of that. And later, in a way, it was also shown that Bendang almost accepts in a way that it was also his fault that he was not making enough attempt to make friends. So, which I mean, some of us felt that was perhaps it is trying to also. It's not very sensitive to those type of people who has been who are victims of this type of violence and trauma, and then you are. It's almost like calling, say, the Black Americans that it is their problem that they remain in the ghettos. They don't come out. They are not coming out and mixing with others. That is number one. And number two, also, I mean, it was also, you can say that it was also not representative of, some other kind of, internal kind of, politics of Northeast that, there are so many communities of Northeast, and I realized that some people are not happy that on the representation also. So that was a problem, and why I called it problem of privilege is also because in a way it was issue of food, right? Which is a very political issue.
Yes.
The right to
Yes.
eat what one eats, what one wants to eat. It is not only an issue of choice, but it is also there's a larger politics involved. It is about one's assertion that you want to assert your right. So that in a way also was trivialized in some way. Although the message was very good, it was a positive message, but the way the treatment was, it got trivialized in a way that there should have been, I think, stronger take on that. That it is a right for those people. There was almost apology given. That it's like because there are places in which I think some characters, the local characters, some Delhi characters, they talk about that it is also our right that we get offended by the smell. And to that, there was no rejoinder, there was no reply. So it's almost like the acceptance of that, and it's trying to almost like you're trying to balance that. You're trying to show the other side of the story. Whereas my position was that cannot be the other side, because that way I personally know so many people from Northeast who also says that they also used to feel equally uncomfortable in say hostel messes or shared places where a lot of people are also completely not used to smell of spices or strong smell of oil or different type of things. So that adjustment is always made, which is seen as very normalized, which is not at all seen as adjustment but taken for granted. But the other way, it is seen as adjustment. So I mean, I was thinking this balancing is kind of not very. It leaves some room for this type of kind of sensitivity. Therefore, I was saying that it can be experienced from certain people who are privileged that they can move from one space to another, but it cannot be experienced for all the people. Some of them who are not privileged enough that they have to be in those places, they just cannot move out. So I was saying that it cannot be their experience. So in that sense, I don't know. I mean, I have not been able to answer your questions properly because it's a long essay and you need to quote different scenes and different kind of situation. But it was just a brief.
Maybe someday, specifically on this topic, we can get back again and do another.
If the audiences wants to know if my answer might not be satisfying some audiences, maybe they may please look for it. They can read the essay, as Meto already talked about the name. Akhoni is a privilege. Akhoni, a tale of privilege, I think it was called. A tale of racism.
Yes.
It's there on Google. You can search, you'll find it.
There was another one of your comments also about mainstream media always talking about racial discrimination when it comes to Northeasters, like there are no other issues to talk about. I mean, you seemed pretty angry about it. So can you explain to our viewers why did you?
I don't know. I mean, I think I have to know the context in what I said, because in itself, is this the context? Like the picture you're showing? Okay, fine. I must have said it in certain context. I don't remember in what context I must have said it, because I do believe it is very important to talk about the issue of racism. And maybe I meant it in the sense that you cannot divorce the issue of racism without talking about the larger reality of Northeast, that how it is a region which is very militarized, how it is a region which is at the periphery of national imagination. A lot of people still cannot place it on the map. So without knowing all these things, you suddenly cannot understand the issue of racism. That you cannot understand why certain people from Northeast are equated with Chinese or some this type of derogatory words. I'm very happy that after a lot of protests and after a lot of demands, now it is an offense, it is a prohibition to use the derogatory racist words. Now you cannot openly mention it. So it's a very welcome development. In that context, perhaps I mentioned that without understanding the overall history and overall positioning of Northeast within India, there is a very important, very interesting essay called India Mapping the Indian Face, that talks about, when you talk about the Indian face, quote unquote, why in your imagination you leave out the Northeastern face. And there is a very powerful poem by, if I'm right, her name was some Mizo poet, some Ralte. Sorry, I'm at this point I'm forgetting. It is called "How Does an Indian Look Like?" I'll get back with the name. How does an Indian look like? Very powerful poem. Short poem.
sounds
about
itself very interesting. I'd definitely like to check that out.
yeah. So if it was like a Zoom session, I could have shared the screen. We are very used to this Zoom session where we share our screen on the side, show the slides and all that, those type of talks. So I could have shown the poem. It's a very nice poem. It talks about how India is a curiosity, and it's about this map and geography and how certain faces are left out of that. So I must have mentioned about this, that media always talks about racism, but it still does not want to engage with the larger narratives. Why is it happening? No, where are these people coming from? Why people are leaving their homes and coming to this metro? Why there are people staying in shabby houses with small salary and leaving their hometowns? What are the conflicts happening there? And why certain people are not wanting to go back? And even if people want to go back, why not all people are finding jobs? So this out migration, what is causing the out migration? Of course, a lot of it is aspiration. People want this good life, so-called good life of city, but a lot of it is also compulsion. It's also push factor, right? Not all are pull factors. So I was just mentioning that media also needs to come to the small towns of northeast nook and corners, try to understand these realities, and then you can make sense of this larger debates on racism. Yeah, so
And that's
that's what.
exactly the point. That's what I actually understood from what you wrote, and I liked that point because uh, it's always limited to tours and traveling and tourism, or
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
about racism. There are many, many
absolutely.
bigger issues to discuss about, and anything
Yeah,
big happens here, it does not make like headlines
yeah.
in the main,
as
right? So
as people have very rightly pointed out, I mean, Northeast has been stereotyped in two broad ways always. Either it is seen as a land of extreme conflict and violence, or at the other end of spectrum, it is seen as this land of exotic beauty, exotic charm. So this two end of spectrum. So not in
exactly,
between, this large gray area is missed out.
right. So, and what is being from Northeast yourself, sir, and understanding it better than anyone else? What do you think is the biggest challenge currently facing its development?
Uh, I would say, first of all, one has to begin by, in a way, sensitizing the whole understanding of development itself. That itself is a challenge. The model of development that suits our region, that it has to be a multiple kind of a multi-pronged model. It's not that one size fits all type of approach. Different kind of development realities for different region, different states within region, sub-regions within region. That is one. That is number one challenge. How to localize this approach. How to bring in both the voices and perspectives of local people plus the experts. I won't say the experts are not needed. That is one. That is the creation of local stakeholders, sustainable local stakeholders. So sustainability is one big challenge. The sustainable models of development, not those model that is that here to some years and then just leave specs up and leave, not that type. Sustainability is number one, and number two. Although we ask me one, but I would say number two is involving the youth, because end of the day, youth are the future, and like any other region of India, Northeast also is a young region. If you see the number of young population, which is very high, India as such is a young nation, which we call is actually a youth bulge. India is supposed to have something called youth dividend, or some kind of dividend that we have, that is more presence of young people. How to turn this dividend into our asset, not a liability. It can also become a liability if we don't know how to handle. So this young population should be asset, not a liability. That is another challenge, how to do about it. So for that, I think the skill development is a very interesting, very important approach. How to develop them into skill, but how moment I call it skill, it should not be immediately talked about in terms of again those short-term kind of market-oriented jobs. It has to be something that is long-term, that is sustainable, and that is something stays with the community. That is something that stays with people in the long run. So those type of skill. So locally viable and sustainable skills. So I think these
So
are two
do you
challenges.
Yeah, when you have said one size fit all, this statement, it just got me thinking that do you think the government is doing enough? Because sometimes what is the schemes and the government, the programs that come up in the center, I feel it's mindlessly, applied in Northeast, whereas like Northeast. sometimes it has like really, really different. I mean, if you
Yeah,
see the youth also, you were saying about mobilizing youth. I think the
absolutely right.
people here are very creatively oriented. They're like
Yeah,
creative people, and then
yeah,
trying to fit in all one size fit all. It somehow it doesn't work for people of Northeast.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
the
absolutely
outlook
right.
is different and everything. So, do you
Yeah.
think the government is doing enough? Like, we cannot say much
Um,
about the central government,
yeah.
but the state government, the government
I
who
mean,
represents us, like,
yeah.
do you
So
think they are
that's
actually getting the problem right?
yeah, I get your point. I think, I mean, and that's why that is the mandate of the government, the local government. And in fact, this brings me back also to the point of SDG, because as far as I have read, also one thing I appreciate is that SDG is also focusing the even is also focusing through the government nodal agencies. They are focusing also to tie up with the local self-government institutes, that is the PRI institutes, and the local urban bodies. So those
Yes,
representative bodies at the grassroots level. So there is a focus to empower the representative bodies at the grassroots level, which is a welcome step at one point to a certain level. Having said that, also how far the local level bodies itself understands this vision, because one has to have the understanding of this vision, how to, as you mentioned, this how to in a way visualize or how to emphasize on the local temperaments, the local virtues, the local skills, the local knowledge that we have, how to understand the importance of that. That is very important. Therefore, we need involvement of those experts also, those people who are trained and who are especially kind of dedicated in bringing them up along as per consultation and with support of the local community leaders. That's why I mean the one size does not fit all approach is highly applicable even within Northeast India, because in Northeast India also we have so many realities. Certain communities are very much community oriented; they are communitarian communities. Certain communities are not. In certain communities, the traditional knowledge system is very intact. In certain communities, it is very disintegrated. So we need this type of approaches even within Northeast. I will stop with just one quick example. I have heard of this example, this consultation of central government health consultation, in which there was this provision that government was trying to introduce one ambulance in rural areas of India, one ambulance
right.
at least in every, I think, 50 kilometer.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in North, it was a welcome step for many states, but for Northeast, it was very difficult for the states to explain it to the ministry that for Northeast, especially for the hilly areas, for the topography, 50-kilometer is a very massive area. So the
Yes,
50 kilometer in the plains and 50 kilometer in the hills are two different things. So these regional realities are nuances or realities are the ones that needs to be understood at the policy making level. Only then our policy will be diverse and something sensitive to Northeast.
true, sir. And even the PRI that you had explained, that is again another whole level of debate because
Absolutely,
PRI
absolutely.
versus Gaumburas
So,
and the local
yeah,
institutions because it
and a lot
died
of
because of the
communities
introduction
negotiation
of
on
PRIs.
PRI. And
Yes,
customary law, places with customary law, they look at PRI itself as an intrusion. Like there are debates going on
exactly.
whether they want PRI or not. So that's why I'm saying this customary laws and this customary bodies itself are needs to be seen as very important participants in this development story.
Exactly. And
At the
they have
same time, the
practically
importance
died
of
out. Yes,
yeah, yeah. At the same time, the importance of individual also, that how they should not also be compromised. Minorities and women, role of women, position of women and the minorities. So it's very complex. So there are this approach has to be, that's why multi-pronged and placed at many levels. Vantage point should be at many levels. Yeah.
uh, mm, so the Northeast has been performing like more better than we had expected in the Olympics. They have been doing so well. They've been bringing medals home.
Yeah.
So apart from sports, do you think we have potential in other areas too?
I guess, of course, I mean, we have potentials in all areas like any other people. I mean, sports, of course, I mean, it's very nice to see that there has been effort since last some years. There has been focus on sports infrastructure. We must credit our previous governments also. There has been it's a part of a process that, infrastructure of sports has been built up over some few years, and gradually you are seeing the positive outcome of that coming up. So there's immense talents in small towns and small cities in remote areas. So that has to be scouted out. And of course, as we know, culturally, our communities are supposed to be very vibrant. We know that in many in cultural industry of India, people from Northeast have left very significant footprint. It's all about our focus now. It's all about our priorities in be it culture or be it sports, how we bring them out. I don't want to again put some stereotypes that Northeast people are good in this or that, because I believe that there's a lot of talents in many things. So it's all about how do we understand again this balance of training plus the talent that exists, how to harness the talent that already exists, the importance of scientific training plus the importance of existing natural talent. So both has to go hand in hand.
Very well said. Harnessing the talent and mobilizing the right resources and the right
Yes.
population, and that's very, very important. So, like we have come to the end of the show now, and before we wind up, I wanted to ask you that you have achieved so much professionally, and then at such a young age, what would your message to our youngsters and our viewers today on Northeast Today Live session be?
If I be very frank with you, I mean, I don't know about message because I myself get very lost with messages. So I don't want to hand out any kind of message. I mean, I can just, in a way, also share with whoever is listening is that, it's always very good to be, just be at peace and be happy with what one is doing. Uh, One has to always see oneself as part of a larger scheme. I mean, why I'm talking about that?
Well, I think we've lost Sir, and he'll be back. And technical team, can you please get back in touch with him? I'm a little confused here if it's my network or his. Hi, Sir. Okay. Oh, it's his network. Okay. I'm not sure. Technical team, has there been any comments or any questions for Sir? You'd like to take them? I mean, I almost missed out on that one. Okay, I guess not. So, since I cannot see Sir, I will wrap it up for today. And I just want to say to our viewers, thank you so, so much. And especially on a very, very important day as this. Thank you so much for joining us. And please do subscribe to our page, and please do follow us for the latest views and latest updates. Thank you once again. And good night and happy Independence Day. Dr. Kaustubh Deka is an assistant professor at Dibrugarh University, Assam. He teaches in the Department of Political Science. Previously, Dr. Kaustubh Deka was with the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia Milia, Islamia, New Delhi. He has been a fellow at the Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy, Chennai, where he looked into the issue of youth and political participation in the context of India's Northeast. He graduated in political science from Delhi University and holds a doctorate from the School of Social Science, JNU, New Delhi, master's degree in political science and M.Phil from JNU, New Delhi. His academic interests includes, besides others, issues of ecological politics in Northeast India, trends of youth politics and identity assertion in the region, as well as inquiries into understanding the category of Northeast India. His professional experience includes Assistant Professor at the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research at Jamia Milia Islamia, New Delhi from June to September 2017, as Assistant Professor at Indraprastha College for Women in Delhi University from September 2014 to August 2016, Public Policy Scholar at Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy Chennai from October 2013 to April 2014, Program Manager of Research at Center for Legislative Research and Advocacy, New Delhi from March 2010 to May 2011. Research Coordinator at Center for Studying of Developing Societies, CSTS, New Delhi from October 2010 to March 2011. Research Associate under Professor Dipankar Gupta at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi from September 2008 to April 2009. Research Associate to Dr. Kavita Sivaramakrishnan, Harvard Center for Population and Development Studies from July to September 2009. Research Associate under Professor Praveen Jha at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi from January to July 2007. He specializes in social movement studies, identity politics and youth studies. His research project was titled Youth Activism and Democratic Politics in India's Northeast 2014 Election in Perspective. His research publications include Prohibitionist Protest by Women in Northeast India, Antyachar, From Movements to Accords and Beyond, The Artist and the Society, Students as Agents of Identity Formation, Language and Literature as Fountainhead of Identities, The Writing of Politics and Politics of Writing, Interrogating the Developmental Policies in the Northeast India, Journal of Center for Economic Studies and Planning. These are some of his publications, with more on the way, and we at Northeast Today wish him the very best in his upcoming ventures.
We have to understand NRC in light of these complex developments, and at the same time also go back at this point to where it all began. And as again and again some of us have been emphasizing, NRC just cannot be divorced from the regional realities of Assam or the specific history of this region within the Indian political system. Number one, NRC cannot be discussed without discussing the peculiar position that the whole concept or the reality of state that has been there in these parts of the region. Right now, for example, we are sitting in this place called Dibrugarh, which is one of the easternmost corner of India, in a university which claims to be the easternmost university of India. And this region, this town, in fact this very university campus, have seen a lot of militarization over the years. There has been a history of conflict, there has been problems and conflicts centering around violence, leading to violence that has been central to the very conceptualization of these places. These places have come about through a process of cycle of violence. That is something that we cannot keep aside when we discuss this ongoing process of NRC, the tragedy or the complexity that is NRC. So the failure of protection of human rights under the NRC should not come as very surprising to people who are used in this region here, who are used of the human rights being violated under different ABCD, different pretexts. It is not to justify the violations that has been done in the name of NRC, the harassment meted out to different sections of people in the society, especially the most vulnerable section of the society who could not access the different bureaucratic structures of the state. And this is precisely why we have pointed out from day one that as an exercise, NRC will prove to be punitive not only to the religious minorities, contrary to the portrayal of it in the initial stage, but to the vulnerable minorities of all the sections, those who fall out, who are pointed out because of the lack of education, because of their poverty, because of their other inabilities to access this bureaucratic structure of the state. So in that ways, NRC has come out as a system, as a process that has victimized the vulnerables of different sections. And in the sense, it has actually, in a way, created a system that is equal in their treatment of inequality.
Who would like to come in? Abhijit. You saw that. Dr. Kaustubh Deka. Abhijit, who would like to come in? Kaustubh Deka from Dibrugarh. Abhijit, you're coming in. This link, who's making this a Hindu-Muslim issue? Abhijit. Abhijit. Abhijit is on the debate.
We have some double standards.
Kaustubh Deka from Dibrugarh versus Rupam Banerjee from Kolkata. Please, calm down everyone.
Yeah, Arnab, you see, that's the irony, because as you rightly say, Assam has been fighting a rather heroic battle all alone all these years. And now, because of Bengal election, now suddenly people are kind of talking about it. And you know very well that a lot of young people in Assam have lost life. It has been a ravaging issue in Assam, and we all have been facing this is a real issue, the illegal infiltration issue. And also, I completely agree with you that it is actually an issue of citizenship, a citizen versus a foreigner, not a Hindu versus Muslim issue.
And I'm actually trying to bring in this one region, one area which often fails to find enough mention and focus, that is northeast part of this country. And I'll be, my paper that is there in the journal, and I'll be mostly drawing from there, is focusing on some of the experiences and what kind of complexities and contradiction it throws up within the whole discourse of women's movement, as well as the struggle for prohibition, the kind of the whole demand for prohibition. I'll be talking mostly of experiences from Nagaland and Manipur.
और of course CAA का जितना expectation था कि CAA will be a decisive factor, लेकिन शायद CAA electorally इतना translate होगा नहीं as a factor, limited impact उसका होगा. It is more like a symbolic statement. लेकिन इलेक्ट्रली उसका वर्डिक्ट के ऊपर कितना असर होगा, दैट्स ए मैटर ऑफ डिबेट. मतलब ये यूथ वोट क्योंकि वो भी फ्रेगमेंटेड हो जाएगा इवेंचुअली, अलग अलग रीजन वाइज और कम्युनिटी वाइज उसका फ्रेगमेंटेशन भी आएगा. और काफ़ी ये भी है कि यूथ में जो वोटिंग एपैथी होता है, वोटिंग एपैथी भी बहुत है. इफ यू सी द परसेंटेज ऑफ पोलिंग, यूथ पोलिंग हमेशा थोड़ा कम ही होता है एक्चुअली.
To give you a brief introduction of Dr. Kaustubh Deka, he teaches at the Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University, Assam. Formerly, he was with the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia, Milia, Islamia, New Delhi. He has been a fellow at the Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy, Chennai, where he looked into the issue of youth and political participation in the context of India's Northeast. He holds a doctorate degree from the School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His academic interest includes, besides others, issues of ecological politics in Northeast India, trends of youth politics and identity, assertions in the region, as well as inquiries into understanding the category of Northeast India.